So, as per usual, I've been spending a load of time on Instagram. It's a problem. One thing that keeps cropping up on there are these beautiful textured dark backdrops, kind of look a little bit like maybe the concrete or stone or something like that. Today's episode of When Will I Learn is going to be about how to make those. Let's jump into it. Some snazzy B-roll. So when I talk about backdrops, I mean the background and the kind of surface that you put stuff on. You've seen me do it before, the flat lay type stuff, the canvas backgrounds. When I talk about backgrounds, I just mean either of those. For these ones, I needed something that could be quite a big table, like a big impromptu table. And for that, what I did was, in fact, I'm going to send you to me outside looking clueless. And he'll explain it to you, I'll explain it to you, we'll explain it to you. Well, I got a full sheet of MDF and I got it cut down into two 90cm pieces and then whatever the offcut was. Cheers. So the reason I wanted this impromptu tabletop was because I bought these sort of trestle tables and basically you can just stow them away, bring them out when you need a really big surface to work on. You'll notice that the backdrops from the other videos, like this one, they're smaller, designed to work on top of a table that's already there. The whole thing starts with some matte black paint. I use chalkboard paint. You can use any matte black paint. Chalkboard paint's really good because it's super matte and it tends to only need one coat, especially on MDF. The next step is to grab some of your old rags. You can use bits of old t-shirt, bits of old whatever. You just want to cut it up into strips and bunch it up, tie it up somehow. You can just grip onto it, but it's messy enough already. And what this is going to be a way to create texture by just dabbing it in the paint and then onto the surface. For the paint, you're going to want to go a little bit lighter than the black, so just add a little bit of white to whatever black paint you're using. I'm keeping this one a neutral colour. Go for it, start stippling it on to the surface. You're going to want to build this up in a couple of layers. I only did 2, but that was just time constraints. Leave it to dry in between. You don't actually need to, but you'll get a bit more definition that way. So for the second coat, I just threw some paint at the table. I had the added benefit of leaving some little lines and a bit of slightly different texture in there where I didn't quite get to it with the cloth. If it's starting to look too bright, you can just go back in with some solid black, just darken some bits down if you really need to. So for whatever reason, the human mind finds it really difficult to work in a random way. So you'll actually end up creating patterns if you're not careful. What you want to do to combat that is let the actual fabric do a lot of the work. So what I mean by that is kind of chuck it around. You also want to let it be a bit loose so it can kind of flop about as you're dabbing it down. That's going to add a little bit of random into it. In doing the research for this, I was looking at how painters create texture. One of the things I found was this, and this is a sea sponge. Basically, it's just a really textured sponge, and they just grow in the sea, which is weird if you think about it. So what you want to do with this is wet it so that the paint doesn't just dry up as soon as it goes onto it, and then just dip it in the paint and use it the same way you were using the cloth. Try and be as irregular as possible when you're moving it around, just to get that randomness in there. And what I did for the colour when I was using the sponge is I went really, really light. because I was kind of thinking about those sort of granite work surfaces. You know, the ones you can see like little pits of light, really white stuff in. No? Just me? Fair enough. The idea with this sponge is not to cover the whole thing. Work in little patches, create like flows and seams. I always like to think of it like when you see the photos of like galaxies and stuff, they're very natural, but they're also sort of spreading out and they're clumped and stuff like that. Trust me. So in my first test, when I finished, it was looking a bit too bright. It was looking a bit like in your face still. It looked fake. So what I did, and I don't know where I got this idea from, I just pulled it out of my arse. I got some charcoal and I got it on some sandpaper and I just made powder out of it and I just spread that powder over the surface. I actually found that it works as well just rubbing the chalk and the charcoal just straight onto the surface and then just wiping it down with a cloth. It also makes it even more matte, so you're not going to get any awful reflections when your light's bouncing off it all sorts of ways, which is great. What I did notice then was that chalk just came off on your hands all the time. So I went and hid it with I got some hairspray, like the cheapest one you can find, sprayed down the surface with that, and that'll just adhere that to it, so it won't come off on your hands. But do you know what? Let's have a look at what you can do with one of these backdrops. Well, two of these backdrops actually. You can do some stuff with one, but I'd made two. Let's go. So I've set the backdrop up. I've set it up in the living room. You may remember this from other videos, like my February picks video that I just did, or the first food video I ever did. But I've set it up here because of this thing. Nice big window for nice, big, soft, natural light. Back to here. So I'm just gonna lay this stuff out. I'm keeping it landscape for the sake of videoing this, but this is probably going to be cropped portrait. One of my main rules is use props that make sense to the recipe. One thing to note is how I let stuff spill out over the sides, because it makes it look like it's part of a bigger scene. Not only do you need texture from the background, from the backdrop, but you need things. So you'll often see food photographers add in like crumbs and things like that. What I'm going to use here is some frozen blueberries. So I quite like the light that's falling on this scene, but there's something I talked about a while ago that I thought I should probably show you, and it's this. So you can pick one of these up on Amazon for like, if you don't want it quickly, you can get it for like £3. And it's just a shower curtain, but it can work to soften the light from the window. I'm just going to put it up on a couple of light stands. So it's darkened down the scene a bit, but it's much softer light now. So that's not my favourite ever shoot, but it goes a long way to show you what this simple, cheap, dark background can do. I especially like the top-down stuff. I think the texture of the surface works so well, especially with like the things like the frozen blueberries and stuff like that. I think it works really well. I'm going to do a video that's separate to this one that's just going to focus on editing these photos. The reason for that is I think there's so much to go over in Lightroom, even if you're just talking about food photography, and one little segment of food photography at that, just like this kind of dark-ish sort of style. But I don't just want to talk about Lightroom, I want to talk about the alternatives to Lightroom. Things that are either free or much cheaper or just aren't subscription based. So if you make this backdrop and you take some photos on it, tag me on Instagram. The link is down below. Follow me on there while you're there. Just, you know, just give it that little follow. But that's it from me. I'll see you next time.